Sylvia did, she used to be a tester, she's a development manager now, so she's been to the process from both sides. So she's been on the release, she's been on the development, and did it kind of both sides. And straight from the beginning, she was very strongly advocating for the Three Amigos. So if you don't know what Three Amigos is, if you haven't ever tried them, then I'm sure after today's speech you will start using it in your organization, because it's a great tool that can help you make your user stories much better and shorten the cycle time. So, Sylvia Macdonald.
Thank you. Before I get started about the Three Amigos, if you've used Three Amigos before or you're familiar with the process, could you just raise your hand to give me an idea? So there's a few, that's great. So I've been really lucky in my career. I've worked with some really talented people and really talented teams over the years. But as great as those teams were, I saw the same problems happening over and over again, quite repeatedly. Some of these teams were waterfall, but mostly we were working in an agile way. Co-located, developers, testers, etc., all sitting next to each other, but we still saw the same problems. And the main problem I saw was work that the team thought was finished and delivered coming back into the team because we had bugs escaping into our test environments or out into production. And the other main problem was rework caused by, we delivered something we thought was great, exactly what the customer wanted, and when the customer saw it at the end, it wasn't quite what they wanted, so we'd have to spend time reworking again. Then about 3 years ago, about a year before I joined New Voice Media, I attended a BDD workshop, a behaviour-driven development workshop in London, run by Matt Wynne and Steve Took. If you're familiar with SpecFlow, Matt Wynne is the guy who wrote the Cucumber book. And it was a 2-day workshop, loved every minute of it, but the first day in particular really stood out for me, and it was about, and that's because it was about Three Amigos and how effective collaboration can really improve your story development processes and therefore your workflow. But before I get into the Three Amigos, I'd just like to tell you about some of the main problems that I've seen over my entire career, because there are a few that just keep repeating all the time. A couple of projects have always stood out for me that I was on. On this particular project, I was a tester. It was a desktop application, and every customer we got, we would have to convert their database to our database. And there was a developer whose job it was to do that conversion. The developer always spoke with the customer, they'd come up with a solution, he'd code it, and then it would come onto my desk to test. And this particular project stood out for me because I read the spec and rejected the project straight away. Didn't plan a test case, didn't even touch a keyboard. That was 2 weeks' work wasted, had to go back and do some rework. And there was no tester involved in that at all. Project was over time, over budget. Our director wasn't particularly happy about that one. From that point on, I was involved in those, not necessarily in that company involved in the analysis, but I was certainly involved in reading the spec before any code happened. Another project that stood out for me was, this was a large financial company in London that I used to work for. Some of our customers traded on the stock exchange, and they had a report that showed all their security transactions, and randomly some transactions weren't appearing on this report. There had been 2 attempts to fix this. Developer was assigned the task, they analysed it. The first developer coded a solution, tested it, didn't work. It was given to another developer to look at. She tried, she analysed it, wrote a spec, but she actually knew in her heart that it wasn't going to work. So she gave it to me for some advice. So 2 attempts to fix this problem, no conversations happening with anybody, just the developers. Customer was unhappy, he didn't think we were going to be able to fix this problem. This is our internal customer who looked after the accounts that these transactions were about. It's obviously very expensive. We've had 2 attempts of fixing this now, and it didn't work. But this is still, even though it happened a long time ago, it's still one of my favourite projects in my career, and I'll tell you why in a moment. So coming to the top 5 problems I've seen, and this is kind of over the last 20 years, it's the same 5 problems reoccurring all the time. First one, it's not what I wanted. So this is a classic picture that actually comes from my first programming course. So I was a developer in my early days. This was one of the pictures that was on my course as well, and it was about don't assume you know what the customer wants. You need to speak to them. So what I've seen happen in real life is that the teams talk to the customer at the beginning, then they go away, do the work, test it, and they deliver it, and then the customer sees it at the end. And then they say, well, that's quite nice, but it's actually not quite what I wanted. Could you do something else? And we end up with the work coming back into the team, stopping the work we were planning to do, and taking a bit more time and money to deliver. Next one is the team, or all the members of the team working on that story, don't really understand the business problem they're trying to solve, or the impact they're trying to make, the why. Why are we doing this story in the first place? And if you don't understand why you're doing the bit of work, you're not necessarily going to come up with the right solution. If you haven't got the right solution, your testing is affected. If the testers don't understand why we're doing the story in the first place and what the end users are going to see, that's going to affect the kind of testing they do. And the end result is the work that we deliver. Go back to the previous slide, and it's rejected because it's not quite what we actually wanted. Second one, particularly around testers. How can you exploratory test something if you don't actually understand what you're doing, what the story's all about? And actually, I think you can understand it. You can exploratory test it because of the nature of exploratory testing. But I think you do a much better job if you understand the why, why we are doing the story in the first place. What is it the customer's expecting? And a lot of the time, the testers don't have the understanding of the story. It's because they're not being involved in story kickoffs, they're not in the design sessions, they're not involved in the discussion. Or if they are, they're not always asking questions, they're not vocal, and they're not, or maybe they're too shy to say they don't understand. Either way, all of those things kind of join together and make it hard to explore something effectively. Going it alone. This one I've seen quite a bit in my testing career. So we've got our nice Kanban board with all the columns. You come in on a Monday and there's a piece of work in the ready to test column that I've never seen before in my life, know nothing about it as a tester. And it's, the developers picked it up, decided to do a bit of weekend coding or late night coding, or just didn't want to wait around for everyone to be available to talk about the story, and they've come up with a solution. And as a tester, I had to go and ask all the questions that I would have asked in the story kickoff if I was in it. Every time that's happened for me, we've ended up with more bugs. It's been rejected and gone back into development. I've only thought about that before. So that's, you're working on a story, you might be having the conversations, but partway through, either at the end, because it's not what the customer expected, or because the tester's seen it and started asking questions after it's coded, things crop up. And for an example, things crop up and you have to do some rework. And an example in my career that stood out for me was a company we developed a website for. And it was a memberships website, so you had individual membership and corporate membership. So we were talking to the customer, there was devs, and I was there in the testing aspect. And it was all going very well, and we thought we'd decided exactly what the customer wanted. The customer agreed. And then I asked a question, does all corporate membership fit into the 3 tiers of pricing that we had? The customer had said they had. And she said, no, actually sometimes we do bespoke deals. It might be a particular company we really want to get into. So we go completely off track and make up some sort of membership deal that's particularly for them. That one question almost doubled our design requirements and the work that we had to put into that system. Because I'd asked that question in the chat with the right people, it was fine. We built that into it. If I wasn't in that conversation and I'd asked that question after the devs had done all their work, that was a lot of extra expense that we may or may not have been able to get charge the customer for, but also a lot of rework that would have affected our rest of the plans for the next couple of months. There's a common theme on all of those problems and the 2 projects that I spoke about before, and it's ineffective collaboration. People not talking to each other, or if they are talking to each other, they're not talking at the right time or to the right people. So it's about talking to the right people at the right time about the right things, and quite simply that. Going back to my favourite project, those missing transactions on the financial report, the reason that was one of my favourite projects is because of the lesson I learned on it. And it was, when I picked up the project, I had a look at the code. It's just a basic report, looks at transactions in a database, prints them out with summaries, and it looked fine. It was a standard reporting program, no problems. So I went and spoke to our customer who was in our building, so it was easy to speak to him. So the other 2 people could have gone upstairs as well and spoken to him. customer showed me the problem, and it was quite clear, yes, there were seemingly random transactions not appearing on this report. So the next thing I did, I thought, well, I want to look at the data. I had a good relationship with the DBA, a database administrator. So I went and had a chat with him, and between the two of us, because it's a financial institute, there are rules around who could look at raw data in the database, etc. So between the two of us, we were able to look at the data, and I soon spotted a pattern. All the missing transactions were of a specific category. So that makes it quite easy. Category A transactions were not appearing on the report. Problem there is my team that I worked on didn't look after category A transactions. So I went and spoke to the other feature teams in our department, found out who looks after those. Found the team, they agreed, yeah, this is a bug, and they fixed it. So in about an hour and a half's work, by talking to the right people, I managed to solve that problem without hitting a keyboard, without writing a line of code. And that lesson I learned there about talking to the right people at the right time, it doesn't really matter what the rules of the company are. You know, nobody told me I could do that, but also nobody told me I couldn't do that. I just thought I need to speak to these right people, and doing it. And I learned that was a really valuable lesson for me to learn quite early on in my career. So, coming to Three Amigos. What is the Three Amigos? So this is just a little bit about what I learned about Three Amigos from the workshop I mentioned at the BDD workshop, but also from experimenting with Three Amigos and the feature team I was in New Voice Media. Three Amigos isn't just one thing. It's collaboration. It's conversations between three voices. Those voices being business voice, so your product owner or business analyst, or your actual customer if you're dealing with real life customers in your company. Development, the developers, and test. There's a minimum of 3 voices. If you've read Goiko's book, Specification by Example, it's the same kind of thing as the specification workshop. And putting it simply, that's what it is. It's collaboration across 3 basic voices in your company. And why would you want to do one? For us, and in my experience, it helps answer really important, that first one, what's the business problem we're trying to solve? If you don't understand the impact you're trying to make with your stories, the work you're doing, you might build something, and you might build it very, very well, but if it's not the right thing, it's a bit of a waste of time and money. You're going to have to redo some work, or the customer's not going to be happy with what you've delivered. So it's really important that everybody on the team, everyone working on the bit of work, understands why you're doing it. And doing the Three Amigos with the product owner or your customer, there, answering questions and making it clear, and resolving miscommunications and misunderstandings helps that. And if you understand the business problem properly, everyone does, you come up with a much better solution. You can also resolve at that point before writing any code, how are we going to test this? You know, what kind of automation are we going to have, etc. And how will we release it into live? That bit often got forgotten in the teams I was in before New Voice Media. You know, there might be some technical difficulty about releasing this into live. Key bit of the Three Amigos, brainstorm the scenarios. And by scenarios, I mean the business rules and examples that illustrate those rules. The product owner in that meeting is really important. He knows the business rules you're trying to develop in these stories. He knows what you can and can't do from a business perspective. Having the developer and tester in there helps come up with concrete examples that illustrate those rules. I'll show you some of those in a moment as well. Really key. This is the one message that, if this is the only thing you remember from my talk, remember this line. Three Amigos is not just one story kickoff done in a Three Amigos fashion. Three Amigos is ongoing collaboration between the business voice, the product owner, business analyst, customer, whatever it is in your company, development and test. And actually, there's a few other people that sometimes come into Three Amigos as well. But that is the most important message of my whole talk, is ongoing collaboration, not just one meeting. And that really is the basis of what the Three Amigos is. It's not complicated, it's not technical, it's just communication, effective communication. I want to tell you a bit about how we implemented Three Amigos in the feature team that I was in at New Voice Media. So I was on, it was a small feature team looking after our IVR platform. And we experimented with Three Amigos, and we kind of decided to give it a go. And as you can see, it's not, our Three Amigos process isn't just one meeting, it's actually three things: the backlog grooming, the Three Amigos story kickoff, and then ongoing collaboration. Our backlog grooming session, so we had 2-week sprints. Had a normal sprint planning session where the product owner would go through the prioritised backlog. But we also had a short 30-minute backlog grooming session. And in that session, we looked at the next 2 to 4 stories. They were already prioritised, so it was always the top ones on the backlog, and just made sure they were in a fit state to be Three Amigos, is what we called it. And by that I mean the story description that you have, in order to do something as a whatever I want to do something, that clearly described the business impact you're trying to make. One of my favourite questions in that session was, that looks like a solution, what's the purpose, what's the business impact? So if it looked like the solution to develop, that doesn't tell me what the problem is I'm trying to solve. And as a tester, I want to know that because I'm going to be exploring that story to make sure it solves that problem. Just having those few conversations in there, they're not long, we're doing 2 to 4 stories in half an hour, so you're not spending long on each one, but because you're clarifying the understanding of why you're doing the story, you naturally start asking questions, and some of those questions we actually don't know the answer to. So straight away we've surfaced unknowns that we're going to have to get answered before we can actually do anything on the story. So we've found some work for ourselves already. For us, our product owner led that meeting because it's about the business impact. It was natural that he led the meeting for us, but we always had the product owner, dev and test in that meeting as well. And this is, when we started Three Amigos, we weren't doing this backlog grooming, and it wasn't going so well for us. So Alex, the other tester on the team, it was something he did at his last company. So we decided to experiment with it, found it worked, and made our Three Amigos session, or our story kickoff session, more effective. So we've kept this. Now so we've had the backlog grooming in our sprint, then we're ready to pick up stories. So this is a picture of the Kanban board that the IVR team used. I took a couple of weeks ago. So that's actually the work. So you can see the work and flow. They've got things going, and they've got one story in process. The first column you can see there is a Three Amigos column. That means that our process is every story has a Three Amigos. It doesn't go further on the board or into our process unless it's had a Three Amigos. That Three Amigos, as I've already said, always has the product owner, the developer and the tester in it. Sometimes it has other people. For example, some of our stories are a little bit technical. They might involve restructuring the database in some way, or it might involve some of the low-level messaging parts of our system. And we know that when we're going to, at some point, need to speak to system architects or DBAs, or there might be some specific performance testing considerations or security testing considerations. So we will, at that point, at the Three Amigos, invite those people in, or at least go and speak to them and find out the information we need from them, get their input into our stories before we start coding. And those, we tried to time box those to 30 minutes each. If you've done your backlog grooming and you've had that conversation and we all understand why we're doing the story, it also means we're thinking about it in the back of our minds. We come to the Three Amigos prepared. And we've got ideas, we've got questions. And that meant a short 30-minute meeting was really productive, really effective, because we weren't faffing about and messing around with trying to understand the story in the first place and wasting the first 10 or 15 minutes of it, just trying to understand why we're doing something. This is actually the IVR team that I worked on. They are doing a Three Amigos now. So you've got the tester on the left, Alex, Rob, a developer, and Kevin, the product owner. And that is how they do their Three Amigos at the moment. They're around one screen. Rob's updating Jira. We have a template in Jira that just has questions on it, headings, and they act as a reminder of the kinds of things we need to talk about in our Three Amigos. So one will be security considerations. Another one is release toggle considerations. We do trunk-based development, so we use toggles extensively to protect the work going out. We've got headings in our template that help us during the Three Amigos to remember to talk about and decide what our release strategy is. We update Jira as we go, so if somebody needs to see the story that's not around or not in the meeting, they can look at Jira. That's obviously a reminder for us. We know why we're doing things. And what started to happen naturally, although it wasn't purposeful in the Three Amigos, but because we were talking about the stories much more extensively and collaborating much more, we've ended up splitting our stories much more effectively, which meant we've had smaller, more focused, well-designed stories, which in itself helps your workflow. This is another one of our teams. It's the omni-channel team. Now they're split between part of the teams in the UK, part of the teams here in Poland. So that, again, that's a photo I took a couple of weeks ago, and that's a Three Amigos in process. So they do theirs on headsets over Skype or Hangouts, whatever tool they're using at the moment. Works really well for them, but you don't have to have a special room or special gadgets or tools. I've done Three Amigos on headsets like that, huddled around a screen in a room with a whiteboard. Some of our sessions involved a lot of UI work, and we would get our users, our professional services department, to come in and help us, and we'd draw out what we were thinking of doing. Especially if it's a bit complicated, that really helped, being able to draw what we were thinking. I've done it in a room with post-it notes. It's whatever works for your team and your situation. The main idea is that you're talking to the right people. You've got product owners, you've got the business representative, you've got developers and testers collaborating in some way, whatever way works in your company. I think I mentioned this one before. You focus on scenarios, the rules and examples. They become your acceptance criteria, which hopefully you'll be automating at some point. This ties in with example mapping. Is that a term? Is anyone familiar with the term example mapping? Example mapping is literally just coming up with concrete examples of your business rule that show really clearly what that rule means in both a positive and a negative fashion. So for here, the rule we came up in, this is from a real life example from one of the stories I worked on, and the story was when somebody places a call to the company, that call plan will hit the customer's endpoint with a web service, and that will return back some data about the customer. Now, when you're doing that, obviously there might be some problems with that web service. That might be down, it might not be accessible, etc. So our rule was we wanted some useful message generated for our ops department who are monitoring our logs to be able to know what to do when the web service returned an error. Sounded great. Because there were testers in that meeting, in that Three Amigos, we started with the what if questions here. What if it's a 404? Is that the same message as if it was a network error? Or if there was a timeout? Are they all the same messages? And the answer was no, they weren't. Because those messages were for the ops department. They needed to know what had gone wrong and who could fix that. Now if it's a 404, the only way that's going to get fixed is if we go back to the customer and say, hey, your web services have been found, what is that, what's going on? You'd have to do a configuration change, otherwise that message is going to get repeated. Whereas a network error is a completely different situation, and it's probably our ops guys that are going to have to do something. So that simple question in the Three Amigos saved a lot of rework and made that story got delivered very well, and our customers, the ops department, were really happy with that. In your Three Amigos, you're going to be talking, well hopefully you're going to be talking about things like release strategy. How are we going to release this story? How are we going to support it in live? How are the people monitoring your system going to know what to do when something goes wrong? So the template that I mentioned, we've got headings for all of that kind of stuff. So we discuss it in the Three Amigos, and we capture in Jira or whatever tool you're using to capture your stories. Write that down, make a note of it. Backwards compatibility and rollback considerations are part of the release strategy for us, so we always talk about that. What are the implications for the story? Quite often there's going to be some questions that crop up that you can't answer. You actually need to go and speak to someone else, so we capture those so that we don't forget to go and get the answers. Out of scope work's quite an important one. This is something that's in our template as well. And why that's been important for us, it's helped us keep our stories quite small and well focused, because we've I won't say eliminated, but we've reduced scope creep. So because one of the other problems that I've seen in story development is you start with a nice small story and then it just gets bigger and bigger as you go along. and then you've got this big whopper delivered and it's not quite right. So actively deciding what's out of scope in your Three Amigos with the product owner there. You've got a product owner so he can make a decision that yes, that's not in the story, we're going to do it later, or we're not going to do it at all, or it's in, and we capture those decisions. And that helps with our story splitting as well. This is one of my favourite questions in the Three Amigos. How are we going to test this? It's a simple question, but it's really important. There's been a couple of stories I've worked on where that one question has changed the design that we came up with altogether, because we realised the solution we'd come up with was not easily testable. And if you can't test it easily, it's not really a good solution. It's not sustainable. Much easier to find that out before you've developed the whole solution. Other things we talk about are kind of that list there. Sometimes it's helpful for the developers to create a mock for us to help us test, whatever it is. The acceptance criteria and rules and examples we've already spoken about, and testing scope. As testers, my fellow tester on that team, we love to test everything. And we would go too far, spend too much time testing absolutely everything, and you don't need to. And part of that's because we may be not familiar with all the automation we've got, so we don't trust the automation. And having the developers in there help us keep that in check, because they know the unit tests very well, they know the spec flow tests very well, and they can show us or tell us, this is already covered, you don't need to do that. So it limits our scope, which obviously helps us deliver the stories better, and keeps us focused on the actual real value exploratory testing that we should be doing on the story. The testing mind map, this is a very personal one for the team I was on. The other tester and I like using mind maps. We don't particularly write lots of test cases, we'll have a mind map, and we start that during the Three Amigos. So it's just as things crop up and we think of things, we plot it down on a mind map. The developers saw that, became interested, we started sharing that with them. So after the Three Amigos officially was finished, we'd show them the mind map and say, look, this is what we're planning on testing. That really helped them with their coding, it made them think of other things, most importantly, it helped them test on their machines better, because they knew we were going to be testing it. They didn't want to do rework, so they would test what we were going to test first. That carried on, and that testing mind map is now a team artifact. The developers contribute it on this particular team. They contribute to it as much as the testers do. They update it as much as we do. They tick things off on it. And after, again, that really important message, after your story kick-off or Three Amigos session is finished, keep on collaborating. It's not just one meeting. Collaborating covers all sorts of things, so demos to the product owner during dev. So if you remember that first problem, that's not quite what the customer expected. You often see that when the first time the product owner or customer sees the end result is at the end of the development. If you're showing them constantly, or not constantly, but several times during the story development, he's going to tell you pretty quick if it's not what he wants, because he's seeing it more often. That really helps the development team. Dev and test pairing, the Three Amigos naturally led us into pairing whilst the devs were working. The testers, us testers would go and sit with them on their machines and actually test on their machines. One of the other teams at New Voice Media do a similar thing, but the testers actually remote into the developers' machines and test. So they're testing on the devs' machines, but they're not sitting next to them. Dev will tell them, hey, look, I've checked this in, have a look. They remote into the dev machines and test there. As I've already mentioned, on the team I was on particularly, that test mind map isn't just a testing artifact. It's not limited to testers. It became a team artifact for the story, and everyone contributed to it. All those unknown questions that got raised during the Three Amigos, make sure they get followed up. The answers to those might give you new acceptance criteria that you need to think about. And again, with the answers to all those questions that cropped up, it might actually change your story that you thought you were doing quite a bit. If it's a significant enough change, do another proper Three Amigos. It's kind of becoming a new story. But this is one that often kind of gets forgotten. You've done a Three Amigos, you've done the official story kickoff. You don't need to do it again, but if enough things happen and enough things change, it's worth spending 5 or 10 minutes, 15 minutes, going over it again, make sure that everyone still has the same understanding of why you're doing the story and what you're doing. So I'd like to kind of go over the benefits we saw. So for the team I was on, the Three Amigos was an experiment. We tried it, we definitely saw some benefits. So I'll go through these now. First one, and most importantly, the whole team understands what we're building and why we're building it. That's really key, is building the right thing, the right way, at the right times. The teams, for me, and what I observed, this meant our team was happy, we were enjoying what we're doing, we felt productive, that makes you feel happy. And I think we were effective. You can see through the board, the stories are going through the board, they're getting into done, and they're staying there, they're not coming back in. That makes us, as a team, feel good. This is the key one. Again, the backlog grooming sessions that we had helped with this. We immediately think of questions we didn't know the answers to. And in the Three Amigos, if there were questions we didn't know the answers to, it's better to know that before you've started writing the code. You can go and find out the answers, you can then incorporate those answers in your design much more effectively than if you've got halfway through. And I have seen it where sometimes the decisions we've taken and the development we've done so far actually limited your opportunities to change direction. Depending on what those questions are, it highlights the other people you need to speak to early, and as I mentioned before, DBAs, architects, but other feature teams as well. At New Voice Media, we've got 7 or 8 feature teams looking after different areas of our product. And some of our work touches the edges of those other feature teams. And there's at least 2 or 3, these 2 examples I can think of where a well-timed question to another feature team stopped us putting a bug out into production. That's a good thing. That's a good conversation to have, a good use of 5 minutes' time. Reduce surprises and delivery of stories is smoother. That's definitely going back to the example where we had the web service endpoint messages going to ops. We developed a nice message. We thought it was a great message for all those different scenarios, for the 404s, for the timeouts, etc. And then we thought, well, before we code this, we'll actually go and ask ops and show them and ask the support desk. If you see this message in paper trail or in the event log, would you know what to do and would you know how to go about fixing it? And they said, it's a very nice message, but no, we wouldn't have a clue what to do. So that wasn't very good. And working with them, because we were working with them before we started development, we actually designed those messages much more effectively. So each message said what the problem was, whereabouts in the call plan it happened, and which department, who needed to go and fix it. Much better solution. And again, that was, 5-10 minute conversation to start with, and then a few more minutes just going over the actual text of the messages they wanted to see. Our story splitting naturally improved. Now, we didn't particularly do anything specific to improve our story development, our story splitting, but it was just because we were working together so much closer, constantly, talking about the stories more, understanding the design of our stories more, we naturally became much better at splitting our stories. And because the more we saw our story workflow going through smoother, the more encouraged we were to split our stories. And this is just kind of a natural knock-on effect of a good Three Amigos. Definitely collaboration. The product owner, developer and tester all talking about the test scenarios, improved our test scenarios. We came up with more well-designed test scenarios and acceptance criteria. Improved WIP and cycle time. If you remember, I was talking about the lone person going in alone before, where work just suddenly appeared in columns. With the Three Amigos, as that's the beginning of our process, there has to be a really good reason to skip it. And what it meant was the team were pulling stories through. The whole team were ready to work on the story. We pull it through, we work on that story, we get it done, then we pick up the next one. That improved our overall cycle time because we had less rework coming through, so there's less things going on, we're all focused on the same bit of work and we got it done, then moved on to the next one. And this escaped bugs in our test staging environment. So we only counted, in our team, we only counted bugs after the developer had checked in. So any testing that we were doing on a development environment, we just fixed. We didn't raise Jira tickets for anything like that. But once it was checked in and gone to our test staging environment, we counted that as an escaped bug. And by working with developers and product owners much closer, as testers working with developer and product owner much closer, doing these Three Amigos, we saw a drop in that, to the point where if we did get a bug in our testing environment, it was a bit of a shock, and it became something to talk about in our retros. You know, how did that get out? How did that happen? And most of the time, it was because we skipped Three Amigos for whatever reason, or we didn't have everybody there. You know, either the product owner wasn't there, or the tester wasn't there. So that was a good lesson. Dev and test share knowledge and skills. Now again, this wasn't particularly one of our aims, but it certainly happened. The developers on this team are really good exploratory testers now, and that's because they've been exposed every day to how we as testers think. They see the questions we're asking, they start asking the same questions. They start doing that testing themselves in the development environment. They started showing us the unit tests a lot more, so we would sit with them, look at the unit tests, which meant we would uncover some missing unit test cases. Sometimes, there's a couple of times where we actually found bugs in the unit tests, and that's because we were all working together on it. And that just generated mutual respect. You know, we both were developer and test, and product owner could see the value of each other's skills, and that's got to the point where the one developer in particular I'm thinking of doesn't like going ahead unless the tester's had a bit of a look at it. So they will, if a tester's on holiday from the team, I'll ask a tester from another team to come and help out for 5 minutes and have a chat and just go over it. We did have some challenges, I won't lie about that. It wasn't plain sailing all the way, but there were more benefits than challenges, definitely. At the beginning it was just a bit of reluctance. You know, here's another meeting to have to fit in our already busy meeting schedule. You know, I'm lucky. The team I was working with there were very experimental, and we're encouraged. In your voice media, you're really encouraged to experiment with the process. So although they weren't really sure of the benefits, willing to give it a go and see how it goes. This was the biggest problem: calendar clashes. So to keep the workflow going through, you need people available to do these Three Amigos. We were having a big problem with calendar clashes, mainly where the testers weren't available. They were doing other things. It caused a bit of a problem. How we got around this one was we booked 2 30-minute sessions a day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, into everyone's calendar. And that meant that twice a day, everyone was available at the same time. And in our daily stand-up in the morning, we'd kind of say, well, do we need to look at the Kanban board? Do we need to do a Three Amigos today? We were always available. And what that did was it helped us build the habit of always doing the Three Amigos and always being available. So what happens now is those calendar invites are still in the calendar, but we just do them whenever it's needed now because it's such an ingrained habit. Is anyone familiar with the spec flow and cucumber gherkin syntax, given when that? Yeah. We use spec flow, so our automated tests get turned into given when then syntax. We were trying to write the given when then syntax in the Three Amigos session. It really didn't work for us. What we were finding was it took a long time. So our Three Amigos were getting very, very long. We were losing focus. We were focusing on the syntax itself and spending more time discussing the syntax of a given when then, instead of thinking about what is the actual acceptance criteria for this story. And we ended up with more bugs because we weren't thinking about the acceptance criteria properly. So what we did is we went back to writing it in English, bullet points, with our business rule, which is the bit at the top there, and then the examples, the concrete examples that illustrate that rule. And then for the scenarios we were going to automate, we did that afterwards. We turned them into given when thens afterwards, and the team would just have a quick look and make sure we all agreed with that syntax. But in the Three Amigos, your focus should be on actually fleshing out the acceptance criteria, you know, really talking about the story, getting all the information you need, not the syntax. It's too small for a Three Amigos. This one cropped up quite often. Often if it's a bug, and it's not always a story you're working on, sometimes it's just a small bug, and people would think, oh, it's just a little bug, I can do that, don't need Three Amigos. It's been several times where we've had a 5-minute conversation and it's changed direction on the bug fix. It's worth doing. A Three Amigos, remember, a Three Amigos is about the right people collaborating. It's not about a 30-minute meeting or an hour meeting or whatever, it's about effective collaboration. So business, product, test, at a minimum, talking, could be 5 minutes. That's still a Three Amigos. So, top 10 tips. when I wanted to give you something to take away with you. So I had a good long think about what did I think the top 10 tips were, and for me, and my experience of Three Amigos, it's these. Top one is the absolute key one. Three Amigos is a collaboration mindset. It's not one meeting. It's about collaborating all the time in your teams. People doing the work attend the session. So on the team I was in, that wasn't a problem because we were a small team, so everyone was pretty much working on the same stories. If your team's larger, and you say you've got 8 people on your team, some dev, some test, and you've got normally 2 work items going through, try and make it so the people that are going to work on that story are in the Three Amigos, because they'll then have the understanding. But if you're capturing the information you discuss effectively, someone else can pick it up anyway. And because you're in a collaboration mindset, they'll be talking to the team and getting up to scratch everything. Really key, everyone participates. It's not about one person presenting the story and the solution, it's about the team all being vocal and all having a say. So everyone has a responsibility to contribute to that meeting, that session. And come prepared with your ideas and questions. If you've done something like background grooming, if you don't do those, at least read the story before you go into a Three Amigos. So you've got some ideas with you. And ensure everyone's happy before moving on. By that I mean, but get to know your colleagues, understand their, understanding body language and facial expressions and tones of voice really helps with this, because you can tell if someone's not happy with the answer to a question, and if they're not happy, don't move on. The whole team need to be happy and understand what you're doing and why before you move on. Example, making a story splitting I mentioned, these are 2 techniques you can use. If you don't know about them already, I really encourage you to go and look up on these. They're really helpful. And build up a shared testing artifact. The whole team are responsible for the quality of the story. It's not just a test function to be responsible for quality. Everyone working on that story is responsible for quality. Acceptance criteria in English or Polish or whatever your language is. What I mean by that is don't use a given meaning in syntax, use common language. And alternate afterwards. Keep them short. If you're prepared beforehand, if you go prepared and you're active in it, they will be short, but that helps. And for us, booking daily sessions in the calendar really helped. It reinforced the habit that we do Three Amigos. Not every day, because we were starting a new story every day, but we had the ability to do a Three Amigos. We had time set aside to do one every day. So how can you start? You can just do one. For us, that's what we did. We ran an experiment. We started doing Three Amigos. It worked for us. We kept it. I understand that that's not always possible to change a process completely in your companies. So if you can't do that, you can start talking to people more. You talk to your colleagues more. Ask questions. If there's a meeting going on about the story, try and get in on it. If you're a tester and the dev and the product owner or business voice are talking about the story, go and join them. Sit and listen. Ask questions. And an easy one that you can do is offer to pair with your developer and tester. You don't have to be sitting in the same room to pair. You can do it remotely. They're starting to speak more, pair more, etc. We'll slowly move you towards a more Three Amigos type setting. That line there, what's the complication? It's only conversation. That's a lyric from one of my favourite songs from The Feeling, but I think it really sums up. It is about Three Amigos. Is about conversations happening with the right people at the right time about the right things. Got some books here if you're interested in following up any more. I can make these slides available to you, or the links there. And that's it. Is there any questions?
Hi Sylvia, thanks for that. Quick question. Who was the most resistant to this change? Was it a particular role type? Developer, tester, product owner?
Developers. Testers were really keen. That may have been down to the personalities on our team. The other tester and I are quite vocal. We don't tend to shut up very much. So we were really like this idea. We wanted to push it. But the developers, they weren't sure the benefit we would get, but they're very, very willing to try it, very experimental, and I really respect them for that. So if they see the value of what you're doing, they are just as much advocates of it as we are now. Yeah.
Are there the same person in all of this meeting in Three Amigos? Was the same person?
It depends. It's about the voices. So you want someone that represents the business aspect, so your product owner.
Yes, the product owner is the same, but
yeah,
it's the same developer, the same tester in each of the meetings.
Depends how you work in your team. And the team I was in, yes, because we were a small team. So we pretty much all worked on the same story. And other teams that are bigger, that have more than one story flowing through at the same time, it's not always the same people. It's whoever's working on that story, and that will just vary.
But you choose, or the team choose most experienced people to during this session?
Sorry, could you repeat that one?
You choose most experienced person from the developers and from testers?
Not necessarily the most experienced, it's about who's going to work on that story.
Okay.
So it depends on how the team has decided who's going to work on that story.
Okay.
But whoever's working on it, please be in that session.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah?
I would have a question from customer support perspective. I'm just curious, for instance, how would you, or who would be the members of Three Amigos involving customer support representative? So, for instance, would you suggest adding one more member and having 4 Amigos just to have customer support involvement, or rather different team members, customer support representative and...
If there was an impact on customer support and they were effectively one of the stakeholders in our story, you know, if they're going to be using whatever it is we're outputting from our story, then yeah, we would invite one of those people, or we'd at least speak to them. You know, we'd go down to customer support and have that conversation. So remember, Three Amigos isn't about a meeting, it's about collaboration. So what we've often done is gone downstairs and spoken to whoever is in support, if it's about them, or our provisioning department, or our professional services department. It's about that, talking to the right people. So yeah, it's not always, the 3 is a bit misleading, it's not always 3 people, it's a minimum 3 voices, business, dev and test, but whoever else is relevant to that specific story. And that's something you as a team have to decide.
Okay.
I think I've gone a bit over time. I think that's it. So, coffee break now. If anyone wants to chat afterwards.